Protests can be powerful forces for change, but sometimes they turn deadly. In this video, we're diving into the dark side of civil unrest to uncover 5 of the most horrific deaths ever caused by protests. From brutal clashes to tragic accidents, these stories are haunting reminders of the high cost of resistance when tensions boil over. On the morning of July 29, 2024, Isaias Jacob Gonzalez, a 15-year-old from San Francisco, Zulia State, was just another teenager excited for his 15th birthday party. He stepped out that day to rehearse a dance routine with friends, his mind far from the chaos about to unfold. But as the sun began to dip lower, the streets outside his rehearsal space erupted into protest. It was the day after the controversial Venezuelan presidential election, and many, including Isaias, were demanding justice for what they believed was a rigged result. Despite the tense atmosphere, Isaias, caught up in the heat of the moment, joined the crowd outside the Matias Losada High School to protest the re-election of Nicolas Maduro. Little did he know that his innocent act of defiance would be his last. The protests were sparked by the announcement of Maduro's victory, which many believed lacked transparency and legitimacy. International observers, including the United Nations and the Carter Center, had raised alarms, claiming the process was deeply flawed. Yet, people like Isaias were determined to make their voices heard, fighting for a fair election and the hope of a better future. But as the evening wore on, violence erupted. National Guard troops on motorbikes clashed with protesters, attempting to break up the crowds. Amid the chaos, a group of armed pro-government colectivos joined in, further escalating the situation. In a tragic turn of events, a bullet struck Isaias in the neck. He was rushed to the hospital, but the young protester died shortly after due to blood loss. His family was left shattered, especially his sister, who couldn't comprehend how a peaceful, carefree day had ended in such horror. "He was a child who did not deserve to die," she said, her words hanging heavy in the air. Isaias' story is not just one of tragic loss, it's a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those willing to stand up for their beliefs in the face of oppression. Isaias, like many others who perished in the protests, became a symbol of the cost of fighting for justice in a broken system. His death, alongside the killings of at least 23 others during the protests, shined a light on the brutality unleashed by Venezuelan authorities against their own citizens. These young people weren't just fighting for political power, they were fighting for the basic right to be heard, to have their votes counted, and to live in a country where human rights were respected. While his death was senseless and brutal, the love Isaias' family and community had for him didn't fade. It fueled the ongoing struggle for justice. He may have died too young, but his memory lives on as a call for change, a plea for a future where no one else has to suffer in the same way. What's clear from Isaias' story, and the stories of those like him, is the need for accountability. The international community must act swiftly to ensure that these human rights violations are not swept under the rug. Venezuela needs transparency, and the people need to know their voices matter. It's heartbreaking that so many have lost their lives for something so simple yet so fundamental, the right to live free from fear and oppression. So while Isaias' life was tragically cut short, his legacy is one of courage and love. His death is a reminder that these protests were not just about politics, they were about justice, and they were about a brighter, freer future for all Venezuelans. Let's honor his memory by pushing for the changes needed to prevent such tragedies, and remember that every person who died in these protests did so because they believed in a better tomorrow. On a warm summer morning, June 19, 2020, 65-year-old Reagan Russell, an animal rights activist from Hamilton, Ontario, set out on what seemed like a normal day of peaceful protest. For decades, Reagan had been the voice for animals, fighting against cruelty in all its forms. That day, she was part of a group from Toronto Pig Save, an organization dedicated to raising awareness about the treatment of pigs, standing outside Fearman's Pork Slaughterhouse in Burlington, Ontario. They were there to give water to the pigs being transported to their grim fate, hoping to make a small, humane gesture in an often brutal system. Reagan's activism wasn't limited to just one cause. She was a passionate advocate for animal rights, women's rights, and Black Lives Matter, never afraid to challenge the status quo. She believed in breaking unjust laws to change the world, much like the suffragists or those who fought against slavery. To Reagan, protesting wasn't just about making noise. It was about making a real difference, about standing up for what was right. Her journey as an activist began at 24 with a protest against seal culling, and since then she dedicated her life to speaking out for those who couldn't. That fateful morning, as she and her fellow activists watered the pigs in transit, the situation took a tragic turn. Reagan, after giving the pigs a much-needed drink, stepped aside to allow a supply truck to pass. But as the truck carrying pigs turned into the slaughterhouse driveway, the driver, apparently unaware of Reagan's position, proceeded forward. Reagan, standing at the edge of the driveway, made a peace sign to the driver, unaware that this simple act of solidarity would be her last. The truck, moving at a slow speed of 12.7 miles per hour, ran over her and dragged her several yards before finally stopping, her life extinguished instantly. Reagan's tragic death was ruled an accident, and the driver, Andrew Blake, was convicted of careless driving, causing death. He received a sentence of probation and a fine, but for many, the legal repercussions didn't feel sufficient for the loss of someone so dedicated to her cause. Her death sparked outrage and sparked international protests in her memory, from die-ins in London to sit-ins in Italy, even inspiring a rally in downtown Toronto. Though the world mourned Reagan, her spirit lived on in the work she began. Joaquin Phoenix, a fellow animal rights advocate, led a protest in her honor outside Fearman's Pork Slaughterhouse, pledging to continue the fight she had started. Animal rights groups across the globe, from India to the United States, rallied together, vowing that Reagan's death would not be in vain. Her passing also sparked a legal battle over the law that led to her death, with advocacy groups seeking to overturn the legislation that restricted protests like the one she had participated in. Reagan's legacy wasn't just about the protests, though. It was about the lives she touched and the change she inspired. Posthumously, she was awarded the Dr. John Rumney Award for her dedication to animal rights, and a short film about her life was showcased at the International Vegan Film Festival. Her story continues to inspire activists worldwide, reminding us of the power of standing up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. While Reagan's death was tragic, it became a catalyst for greater awareness and action. The cruelty she fought against still exists, but her memory serves as a beacon of hope. As we honor her life, we are reminded of the importance of compassion, justice, and standing up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Reagan may be gone, but her legacy is very much alive, inspiring a new generation to fight for a better world. In the aftermath of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini's death in custody in September 2022, protests erupted across Iran, initially sparked by her tragic passing at the hands of the morality police. What began as an outcry over one woman's death evolved into a broader uprising against the oppressive Islamic Republic regime. However, the government's response was brutal, resulting in the unlawful killings of at least 23 children between September 20th and 30th, 2022, as security forces used live ammunition, metal pellets, and violent beatings to crush the protests. Amnesty International reported that the victims included 20 boys aged between 11 and 17 and 3 girls, aged 16 and 17. Many of the children were shot at close range with live ammunition, while others were killed by fatal beatings from security forces. The most harrowing case involved 11-year-old Javad Pashe, who was shot in the back of the head during a protest in Zehedan. 10 of the children killed were from Iran's oppressed Baluchi minority, with the deadliest day of the crackdown occurring on September 30th, when at least 7 children were shot in vital organs in Zehedan. Other children were killed in protests in Tehran, West Azerbaijan, and other provinces. Among the victims were two Afghan children, 14-year-old Mohammad Reza Sarvari and 17-year-old Satare Tajik, both killed during protests. The authorities attempted to cover up their involvement by spreading false narratives. Mohammad Reza Sarvari's burial certificate showed he died from a fast-moving projectile, yet the government claimed the deaths were suicides or accidents. Amnesty International condemned the Iranian regime's actions, with Hiba Morayev, the organization's regional director for the Middle East and North Africa, questioning how the international community could look these children and their families in the eye. Despite global outcry, the Iranian authorities have continued their violent repression, showing complete impunity for their crimes. The children's deaths represent 16% of the total casualties recorded by Amnesty International during the protests. This tragedy is part of a broader pattern of lethal force used by Iranian security forces, as seen in past protests, such as the November 2019 crackdown, which also resulted in the deaths of dozens of children. The regime's actions reflect a deep-rooted culture of impunity, where those in power are shielded from accountability for the most egregious human rights violations. Iran's government has continued to manipulate the narrative, coercing families of victims to falsely claim their children died by suicide or accidents, covering up their crimes with intimidation and harassment. The systematic violence against peaceful protesters, including children, highlights the Iranian regime's complete disregard for human rights. Despite this, the global community has been slow to act. As Iran's security forces maintain their grip on power, the world's failure to hold them accountable is seen as complicity in these horrific crimes. The deaths of these children, many of whom were simply demanding justice, underscore the brutality of the regime. They are symbols of the countless lives sacrificed in the fight for freedom, justice, and dignity in Iran. It was a bright and seemingly ordinary day on February 20th, 2021, in Mandalay, Myanmar. The streets buzzed with energy as protests continued against the military junta that had taken power. Among the passionate demonstrators was 16-year-old Wai Yan Tun, a young worker who had dreams of a brighter future. Wai Yan wasn't just protesting for himself, he was standing up for his country and his people, protesting the military coup that had taken control and imprisoned elected leaders. That day, Wai Yan was in Thinbagyen, where he was volunteering to help injured protesters. It seemed like any other moment of defiance, but it quickly turned into something far darker. As protesters gathered, tensions escalated. The military, desperate to crush the dissent, began firing live rounds into the crowd. Wai Yan, with a heart full of courage, rushed to assist those who had been struck by the bullets. In the midst of the chaos, a shot rang out, targeting Wai Yan directly. The bullet struck him in the head, ending his life at the tender age of 16. It was a tragic, unnecessary death that shocked the nation and the world. Wai Yan Tun became a symbol of the brutality faced by those fighting for democracy and freedom. His death was one of the first instances of bloodshed during what would come to be known as Myanmar's Spring Revolution, and it would ignite even more anger and determination in the protesters. The United States Embassy quickly condemned the violence, describing the killing as a deeply troubling act of aggression. But despite the pain and heartbreak, Wai Yan's death wasn't in vain. His image became iconic. Protesters would carry his face, chanting his name and carrying on his fight. Wai Yan's final words, "I don't think I can make it. Remember my face. Say my name. May my courage live on. Continue this fight for me, for I was taken away too soon," echoed through the streets, a rallying cry for all who still believed in the cause. In a small act of defiance and remembrance, the 41st Street Market, where Wai Yan had worked, was renamed in his honor. The market, which had once been a symbol of mundane work and survival, became a place of tribute. Wai Yan may have been just a child, but he had grown into a powerful symbol of resistance, a martyr for the cause of democracy in Myanmar. Though his life was tragically cut short, Wai Yan Tun was loved by many, cherished by those who fought beside him. and remembered by those who followed his path. His legacy serves as a reminder of the sacrifices that young people have made throughout history, fighting for a better world. His story is a call to action, urging us to stand against injustice and ensure that such senseless loss of life never happens again. Let's honor his memory by continuing to push for peace and fairness in every corner of the world. It all started like any other day: bright skies, a little heat in the air, and the kind of energy that builds up when people come together for something bigger than themselves. In Austin, Texas, 20-year-old Justin Howell, a student at Texas State University, was ready to make his voice heard. The Black Lives Matter movement was sweeping the nation, and like thousands of others, Justin was marching for justice, equality, and an end to police brutality. He was part of a wave of protests triggered by the tragic death of George Floyd just days earlier. It was a simple aim, demanding accountability for the officers involved and a world where no one had to fear the very people sworn to protect them. The protests in Austin, like in many other cities, were largely peaceful, but as tensions built and emotions ran high, something tragic unfolded. On May 31, 2020, Justin was standing in the middle of the crowd, fighting for change when an officer from the Austin Police Department fired a less lethal beanbag round. The officer missed the intended target, and the round struck Justin in the head, causing a catastrophic injury. Justin was left critically injured with a fractured skull and severe brain damage. Fellow protesters quickly tried to rush him to safety, only to be met with more police fire. The chaos that followed left Justin's life forever altered, and yet his story was far from over. Though his situation was dire, the protests that followed Justin's injury became a focal point for many. What was supposed to be a peaceful demand for change had now escalated into something far more sinister. The police were supposed to be keeping the peace, but instead they were becoming a force of fear. This tragic incident highlighted the risks of militarized policing and the need for reform. The very people who were supposed to protect Justin had become a part of the problem. But even in the face of such devastation, Justin's story isn't one of hopelessness. He became a symbol of the struggle, the face of what happens when peaceful protests are met with violent suppression. His journey from that moment on was painful, but it sparked conversations, change, and a renewed commitment to justice. People rallied around Justin, and his case became another rallying cry for those demanding a more just society. The world began to take notice, not just of the injustice that led to his injury, but of the resilience of a generation that refused to back down. Justin's story reminds us that no matter how dark things seem, the fight for justice is one worth fighting. His injuries were a brutal reminder of the need for reform, but they also reminded the world of the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the road ahead seems perilous. The measures that need to be taken to prevent such incidents are clear: more accountability, more transparency, and an end to excessive force in peaceful demonstrations. In the end, Justin Howell may not have been just another face in the crowd. He was, and still is, a beacon of hope, a young man who, in the face of violence, stood up for the values of equality and justice. While his body was broken by the system, his spirit became an unbreakable force. The world may have witnessed his suffering, but it also witnessed his strength and the love from his community, which continued to support him as he recovered. Justin Howell may have been one of the most horrific casualties of the protests, but his sacrifice wasn't in vain. He will always be remembered, not for how he fell, but for how he fought, and that's a fight we all need to carry on.